Hey everybody, I'm super excited to tell you about a new bait that we have coming out with Clam Pro Tackle, Maki Plastic. But we also have another partnership, and this bait is going to be called the Whammy because the women anglers of Minnesota did all of the prototype and research on this bait. They originally came to me with the idea of bringing a zooplankton bait, something very small to market, that would work in a situation where the bite got really tough or where the water was really clear and the fish just seemed to be negative or at least neutral in that period of time. So what we originally started off with was something that was tiny, and it was really just going to be, that small little piece of bait. And when we made that, it was successful. They had a lot of luck with it. I sent the baits back to them, and the ladies all went and fished their lakes, and they had some fun catching fish with them. But they said, what if that bait could be a little bit more? What if there was more value that they could add to the end user by making the bait a little bit bigger? So not only could it be that small piece if you wanted to rip that tail end off, but also what if they were on a shrimp bite and they wanted something that looked like a shrimp? Or what if they were on an ant bite or a backswimmer bite? Could we make a bait that has all three of those in there, giving them one body style, so there's 8 baits in each bag, but maybe there's really 10 or 15 baits in each bag, better value to the customer. So that's what we're most excited about, because the ladies gave us this feedback and it made just so much sense to me as a manufacturer and as the designer of this bait to give you guys more value. So let me show you what I mean today. I've got a couple different ways in which I've rigged it through in which they've showed me how they rigged it through the process of prototyping. So I'm going to go through first with a vertical jig. So this is a Clam Pro Tackle half ant. It's a vertical presentation, and it's one that I use when the fish are on a shrimp bite. So if I'm dropping right down by the side of the weed and I want to drop cleanly through those weeds because those shrimp are in there and they're moving around on the weeds and the fish are coming through and eating them. So I'll take, in a vertical sense, I will fish this bait whole and I'll just stick it straight up on a vertical jig. So it doesn't matter what jig you use. Half ants are one of my favorites. And what this does is it makes it almost snag proof when it drops through the water table. So this thing, when you put it up and down, is going to go just like this. But when you drag it through the weeds, it does what shrimp do. It just does this and it does this. That's how they move through the weeds. If you find in a situation like that that you need to drop into those weeds because you see a lot of aquatic insects either coming up through the hole or there, it's one of those times in which you want to try to fish that bait like that on a vertical jig because nothing gets caught in there and it stays fairly weedless. The other thing that I like to do is if they're vacating those weeds, because they do, as the zooplankton leaves the weeds, that's their food source. So the shrimp actually have to become active in that last third of the season and chase their food because they still need to eat. They usually don't leave the weeds much because they want the protection from the fish. But when they start to swim, what I'll do is I will take that bait and I'll lay it out flat like that and I'll do it whole like that. The other thing is that they do is sometimes they'll hold on to those weeds as a kind of a safety device. So they curl around there. Those scuds that you see that are curled around there, their bodies aren't flat, they're not moving anywhere, they're not twitching. That's where I'll go, and this is on a drop jig, and I'll take sometimes and I'll just rip that head off. So I talked a little bit about how this looked when we first started. When we first started, sometimes it's that small. So that's one bait that you can use. And sometimes that's all those finicky big bluegills will want, or sometimes that's all those big perch will want. It's just a small color splash on there, something that isn't going to move a lot, but looks like something that's in the water table. But don't just throw this piece apart, because if you're on a strong ant bite, you have that as well. So you have that strong ant, and you can rig it either going in this way or coming back up this way. The other thing that you can do with these baits, like I said, with that protection device, and again, this is going to be on a drop. This time the way I'm going to do it is, obviously you can still fish it flat. You could still leave it vertical. You could still leave it vertical even though it's a horizontal jig. But the other thing that I like to do is I like to point that tail right back up towards the head and leave it just like that sea curled shrimp. And again, in those weeds, you drop that down in and that's money in the tank. That right there is fish in your bucket. The thing about all of the baits in Maki Plastic that we try to do, we try to think of value to the customer. How can you break it apart? How can you be creative with what you're seeing out there coming out of the fish's belly? They're either spitting it up onto the ice or you're looking at your bucket at the bottom. How can you best reach into your bibs, grab a piece of plastic, reach into your jig box, grab a delivery system, and kind of put all of those pieces together to mimic what's coming out of those fish at the time? And when you do that, you may catch 1 or 2 or 3 more fish out of each of those holes that you fish, and that's a big deal. That's 1 or 2 or 3 more times that you will have fish in your hand, in your bucket, and in your belly at the end of the day. So this Whammy was an exciting opportunity for the women anglers of Minnesota to give us some feedback on a very, very good bait that they designed, and then I just was able to take that information in, spin it around, put it in my CNC, and make a great bait for you that we think is going to make for some big bluegill, sunfish, perch, crappies to be in your bucket this winter, and I hope to see you out there because I'm going to check your bucket. You drop that down in, and that's money in the tank. That right there is fish in your bucket.